and welcome to my channel. I am Zodiac Bandit, and today we're going to have some spoilers for everything, because we're talking about Campaign 3 and the end of Campaign 3. So, spoilers. One more time for good luck. Spoilers. So with the spoiler warning out of the way, we're going to talk about a few things today. First of all, we're going to talk about the last episode of Campaign 3, because I didn't really give my 2 cents about the episode at the end of that 1 hour recap. So, for the sake of that video, I decided not to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about it here. And then we're going to talk about the campaign overall, the pros and cons of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, just everything in general about the campaign. But first, we're going to talk about the last episode, 121 of Campaign 3. First of all, I enjoyed the shit of it. I think it was a little too long. My only true issue with it is that it was a little too long. It didn't need to be 8 hours. I think most fans would have been very understanding of the, having a 3-hour episode, where the break initially was supposed to start, and then a week later having a 5-hour episode. It would have felt a little bit easier on fans, I guess, if that makes sense. So for me personally, I think that's my only issue. We could have, as a collective fan base, accepted a 3-hour and a 5-hour episode, and I don't know why they didn't do that. I guess it's because they want to start the Divergence EXU miniseries really quickly, I guess. But I personally think that most fans wouldn't have cared if we had gotten a 3-hour and then at the end of the episode got told, like, hey, we were just going to do a break, but we're going to end the episode here because of the fires, and then the next one. I think that would have been totally reasonable. But outside of that was my only con. I very much enjoyed this episode overall. I loved the ending. I loved how all the characters got wrapped up. So now with the one negative out of the way, let's talk about everything else that I very much enjoyed. First and foremost, the conversation they had with the gods was interesting, right? Because this entire campaign, the idea was, I guess not the entire campaign, but for the most part, this campaign was about potentially removing the gods. And I love where they ended up, right? With the idea of them, listening or, learning from Downfall. They learned from history. And I very much enjoyed that idea, where they've taken stuff from the past and put it towards the future. And I very much love that idea, where they're now using it to inform their decisions. I think that's a great idea, and I think that what happened with the gods was awesome. And the natural 20 from Laura to make sure all of the gods did it was sick. And, the way that Matt did it was pretty good. He's like, you need to roll like X amount, or for every number below that, you would lose a god, which I thought was a very interesting idea, and that god specifically wouldn't listen, and maybe they'd be killed off by Predathos, or they'd run, or something like that. But luckily, the natural 20 came in, and now we're going to be getting a bunch of gods becoming mortal, which I thought was a dope idea. I very much love that idea. For me, it just sounds like we're going to have like a bunch of avatars, like Avatar The Last Airbender and Korra. It just sounds like we're going to have like 20 of them, which I think is great and a dope idea. And it eventually leads towards potential players being those characters, which I think is a cool idea and a fun idea. So I think that's dope, and I very much enjoyed how that went. But how they went about doing that with, the Raven Queen having to step forward and need to use a beacon, and then using Ashton was really cool. And the idea that Ashton was the character to sort of step up and be like, okay, we need to make a sacrifice here, I'm gonna do it. Because the entire campaign, Ashton was the one that was like, fuck the gods. The entire time. He and Laudna were the two who said it the entire time, that he hated the gods and that they didn't care what happened to the gods. They did not give a shit about the gods. Fuck the gods as far as Ashton was concerned. So when they were the one to step up, and they were the one to sort of make that sacrifice, that was a true character growth moment of realizing that, yes, these gods are, very powerful and very I guess powerful is the only word I can truly use to describe them in this moment, but they are technically above people, but at the same time, they still make mistakes, and they are in some way or form just like the rest of them. So Ashton stepping up and making that sacrifice to sort of give them a chance was really dope, especially seeing the character that Ashton had beforehand, where he wasn't big on the gods. I thought that was a dope moment. And then seeing the Mighty Nine and Vox Machina and Belisel sort of come together to help catch Ashton and then bring them back to life was dope. And then Essex sort of revealing themselves. about, or to the Bright Queen and the rest of the Kryn dynasty. Very much enjoyed that as well. I enjoyed everything that happened with the whole gods turning mortal thing, the conversation, the act itself, and then the revival of Ashton. Thought it was dope. I do think that Predathos just flying away is interesting, because Dorian brought up an interesting point about how it's just going to go find gods from somewhere else. Like, it's going to go somewhere else and eat someone else's gods and become a problem there, which I think is rather interesting and rather unique. Like, I think that opens up the door for a lot of, like, other people to use Predathos as a character, which I think is really cool. Like, oh, they went from this microcosm to another microcosm, and now they can become a god-eating entity in your game at home, right? I think that's really cool, and it would be the exact same character. I think that's a dope idea and really fun. So, yeah, if you're a person looking to make a god-centric campaign, maybe Predathos will show up. I think that's a dope idea, and I think that door was opened by Dorian essentially saying that, which I think is really cool and really sick. So then, the other thing that I liked about the episode a lot was the guest returns. Now, guest returns is something that they do towards the end of the campaign, or they did it for campaign 1. They didn't do it for campaign 2, but that was because of COVID. So campaign 1 had like a bunch of characters return for like the final 2 episodes or something like that, which was dope and a lot of fun. So when this campaign did it, but it was more story oriented and as opposed to it being like combat oriented, I fucking loved it. The only one that I wish was there was Emily Axford with Prism, but apparently she couldn't do it. Like, she was there initially before the fires, and then she was there after, or she was supposed to be there, but she just couldn't because of scheduling issues. But we had Deanna, Frida, Amy Carrero played both Opal and Denise, which I think was fun and enjoyable. So, am I missing anybody? I don't think I'm missing anybody, and if I am, I apologize. But I think those were the 3 who showed up, and I very much enjoyed seeing them. It was a lot of fun. It wrapped up those stories because we really needed to see Frida. Having Frida come back was huge because that needed to be wrapped up for closure for us fans. So we got it, and the fact that Frida knew, they got a feeling of it, was interesting for me. And the fact that Frida is a fucking werewolf is dope as hell. A mechanical werewolf just sounds so sick to me. And just the image I see in my head of it is so badass. And I'm really hoping that when they animate Campaign 3, they show us Frida, right? Because the idea was Frida felt FCG die, and then they felt rage, and they turned into a werewolf and killed a bunch of shit around them. So I'd very much like, if they get to this point in the anime or in the animated series, that they, FCG dies, and like the next episode opens with Frida's rage. It would open with Frida and then cut to the Crown Keepers, kind of like how, the campaign did. So I feel like that would be a lot of fun for us as viewers to be able to see eventually, that we could see that get animated, because, the animated series has that, they can take that liberty of showing us more stuff than the players would have known, which I very much enjoyed. It's the same thing that we get with like the Chroma Conclave and Anna Ripley and stuff like that. We get to see their stuff. So I'd like to see Frida get this kind of stuff in this moment. So that was really dope and really cool. The guest characters showing up was fun. Overall, loved the ideas of like the guest characters coming back for story reasons, because the story was like the main point, right? So seeing that happen was dope. So overall, liked seeing the guest characters. Now, as far as like characters wrapped up, this episode opened up with showing both Vox Machina and the Mighty Nine, and it sort of showed where they were after the whole conflict, which I very much enjoyed. Like, the Mighty Nine were still working and trying to wrap people up, and the fucking Vox Machina, the old people they went to bed, which I thought was funny as hell. And they were like waking up the next morning to like see if they were still going to be on a god-filled Exandria or not, which I thought was great. But then to sort of, wrap that storyline up in a bow, they helped out with Ashton, obviously. But the bigger thing with that for me was Vax, right? Vax and the Raven Queen, that whole situation was cool because it was the Raven Queen giving like her champions more opportunity and choice, which I very much enjoyed. And I kind of theorized that this would happen for Vax based on this, that he would become a like champion of the Raven Queen on Exandria, and that he would be able to sort of live a pseudo life where he gets to enjoy some freedom for a while and then like, occasionally do stuff for the Raven Queen, the matron, which basically is exactly what happened. And now he and Keyleth got to start over, which I think was a good thing. They didn't just pick back up from where they started, because that would feel disingenuous. Like, it's been 30 plus years, like 36 years or something like that. So it would feel disingenuous for them to forget that happened. So for them remembering that, that's very good. And they have to restart now. There is still that sense of familiarity between them, so obviously, like, it's not going to take them very long to restart. But I do like the idea that they're going to be able to be the leader of their people still, and he's going to be able to sort of deal with the Raven Queen stuff and, deal with that sort of situation, which I think is very fun. And then, of course, we obviously got, like, looks at the other members of Vox Machina and the Mighty Nine, as on top of, like, everything else that happened. So, for the most part, not too many big things happen for them. Like, Grog goes to the moon and meets Gaz Tomo, and they have the most powerful handshake of all time. Scanlan and Pike adventure for a while. Eventually, Pike would, find or hear of the reincarnation of Saren Ray, and she'd go look for them. Serkonos and Leotel are banging, I guess. Percy and Vex have decided to, grow old together and, like, go live at their summer vacation houses, right? That was basically it for Vox Machina, unless I'm missing somebody, which I don't think I am. And I feel bad if I am forgetting, but I don't think I am. And then as far as, like, the Mighty Nine goes, Ford and Jester are planning their wedding. Caleb and Yasha are planning to adopt. I assume Veth is just going to go back to enjoying life as a parent and owning the camp. I don't think they actually covered Veth, now that I think about it. They might have just skipped that over. And then Caleb is planning to just kill Ludinus, I guess. Like, he's just sort of waiting for Ludinus to do something. So he's waiting for that, and he's making, like, bug out plans for he and Essek in case the Kryn Dynasty come around. And then Caduceus went back home. They didn't really talk about Caduceus all that much. I feel like Veth and Caduceus were characters who were sort of done anyway, so didn't really need to talk about them all that much. So yeah, that's Vox Machina and the Mighty Nine. I guess it's time to move on to the important one for Campaign 3, which is the Bell's Hells. Chetney basically got to, live forever. He hasn't died yet, luckily for him, so that's not a big concern. He dropped off Frida at the Gorgine camp so Frida could learn there, and then he went back home to Uthadern at some point and saw that there was a new apprenticeship program under Ultger that is the Pokapi Path, which is very cool and a very unique way of things going for him. Fern would go back home and, like, train to be the next Fate Stitcher, which is a terrifying idea to let that chaotic being be that powerful. And Orem and Dorian basically just continued living life, bouncing between Zephyra and hanging out with their friends and doing other sort of stuff. Dorian would occasionally pull off some heists and shit like that, which is cool for them. And the deal that was hanging over top of Orem's head from Nana Mori didn't mean anything. It was an impossible ask for Nana to be able to do that, so no deal, didn't really matter. He got to keep his powers. He out-hagged the hag, which was a good move. Kind of like how Jester, but in their own unique ways. So, good for Orem. Imogen and Laudna ended up getting their cottage near where Imogen was from. So they basically got to live life, and Imogen would just dream walk with her friends every night when they go to bed. No matter how far away they were, she would always find them, which is very cool. Breus went down the path of the Traveler, which is just so unbelievably fitting, it's not even funny. So I think I've gotten everyone. So hopefully I got everyone. Oh wait, Ashton, my bad. Ashton would effectively continue being a mercenary, and occasionally over his life, he would go to Essek and sort of get answers about what he was, what's going on with them, and eventually on one of their expeditions up to the moon, they never came back. So whatever happened to them, make for what you will. It's likely not a good ending for Ashton, but not everyone gets a good ending. But for the most part, they all got good endings, which is good. FCG didn't get a good one, but we know that. They protected their friends, which is important to them. But overall, I loved this campaign. I think I have a different attachment to it than a lot of other people, obviously, because this channel is basically built around Campaign 3. So I have a different level of attachment to this campaign and everything that sort of happened with it. So for me, obviously things are going to be a little different. So I guess now I'm going to move on to my overall thoughts on the campaign, because I sort of wrapped up how everything went. We're now moving into a new era of Critical Role. Hopefully that means we're going to be hundreds, if not thousands of years into the future, but who knows. But overall thoughts on the campaign was I very much loved it. I thought it was a lot of fun for me. I enjoyed it. I'm someone who will just, as long as it's entertaining and fun for me, like for the things that I find fun and entertaining, I'm going to enjoy it. There are things that I don't like, and it happened occasionally throughout this campaign. But I think I'm going to go through like my pros first, and then I'll go to the cons, and then probably wrap back around to more pros. But pros, I really enjoyed how this campaign was one long story. It was different and unique from the other campaigns, which made it stand out for me, and I very much loved that idea that it was like this one long continuous thing, because I feel like it felt like someone put it into perspective for me, which I thought was a really good way to put it, which was it felt like a D&D module, like one of the modules that you'd get, like Lost Mines of Phandelver or the Tyranny of Dragons or something along those lines. It feels like one long module, right? And I liked that. I thought it was very cool. It honestly, like a lot of people complain that this one didn't feel like a home campaign. I couldn't disagree with that idea more. Yeah, there was a bit of a high qualityness to the background and the table and all the minis and stuff like that. But the fact that it was one long campaign surrounding one long story as opposed to a bunch of different stuff made it feel more homey, right? It made it like my home game. I'm playing in 3 different home games. They've all been one long story. Like none of them have had like big breaks in the arc where like something else happens that could be like the next anime season, right? Like that hasn't happened in any of my games in a while. It did happen at some point, but these games at home typically follow one storyline, right? One big one, and occasionally they dip off into other things. That is what Campaign 3 felt like to me. It felt like a module. So then I like how Matt tried to connect that story to most of the cast. He couldn't connect everybody based on how like they all worked, but there was a good portion of the cast who did have some sort of connection. And initially with FCG they were connected in the fact that Aurora is the big plot line of this campaign. Obviously Imogen and Fern are both Rued is Born, and Orum's connection to Odahan and Ludinus killing off his husband and his father figure. So those 4 were connected pretty strongly to the main story. Breus would then later join, and like his motivation would be to get rid of Ludinus and then eventually use the power for Asmodeus, but then obviously we know that that's shifted, which is good. So overall, I like how most of the party were connected. Yes, that is kind of cheaty saying like most, because 5 of them, 2 of them were the same player, but I feel like out of 9, 5 is most, which it is. So I like the idea that most of them were connected. I'll get to the con of this sort of point later, though. I liked how the references of this campaign were made towards other campaigns, and they started off rather small, and then over time it turned into an Avengers-style team-up. I fucking loved that eventually we got to have all 3 parties in the same spot at once, which was awesome. It was like literally like the Avengers style team up where everyone showed up and they were all ready to go. I very much loved that idea. I liked that we got to see them play as their old characters again, and their like 2 shots that they each got in this campaign, which was dope and was super fun. Even though none of them like were really like all that risky, and none of them died during any of them, I still loved it. I very much enjoyed it. I'm not a big fan of like, as a DM, I'm not a big fan of like trying to kill my players off for any reason. I'm not going to actively seek that out. So the fact that it seems Matt didn't actively seek that out, for me is good. I know there's a lot of people who chant TPK in the chat. I'm not a big fan of that. So that's just me personally. I loved this Avengers style team up that we got towards the end of the campaign. I like that we did get the conclusions to the other campaigns and their other characters, but I don't really need to talk about that because I already did. So then we move on to the cons, which there's a few. Some of the characters didn't get as much focus like the other 5 did. 4 of them specifically didn't get the focus. Chetney is a obvious standout here who didn't get all that much, but if we were to look at Chetney's character, he was like, and honestly look at Travis as a whole, Travis is much more of like a forward-thinking person, and he likes to leave his past and his characters' pasts in the past, right? If you look at all of his characters, they're all like this, and that's why he placed his backstory in Wildmount, a completely separate campaign location to where they were in during the campaign. So realistically, he did that on purpose to just remove his backstory and for his character to move forward, which I very much think is a good thing for him. That's what he enjoys doing. Ashton did get a lot of focus in this campaign, but it wasn't like directly tied to the main story. And then obviously Dorian had their connections to everything that was sort of going on as well, through their own plot line and stuff that was sort of happening in the background. So, and then obviously Laudna had the exact same thing as Dorian and Ashton, where their stuff was unrelated to the main campaign, but did happen throughout the campaign, which was really dope and really cool, especially because it related back to campaign 1. So, as much as this is a con, they didn't get as much focus, I still enjoyed their stories, if you know what I mean. Like, their stories were still fun for me. I wish those stories got a little bit more focus to them. And then the biggest problem that I had with this campaign was how indecisive this group was. They didn't know, they didn't agree on any plans, where to go, what to do, who to kill, should they kill somebody. They never made up their minds. I don't know what it was, but even as they were doing the thing that they thought they were doing, their plan would change. The people would have different ideas of what they thought they were supposed to be doing. Everyone would be confused at certain moments in time. Are we running? Are we not running? Are we fighting? Are we killing? Are we leaving them alive? What's going on? Questions like that would be asked constantly, which isn't a bad thing. I think it's good for them to ask these questions, but after a while you need to make that decision, right? And that, to me, was the biggest issue I had through the entire campaign, which was them never truly making a choice until it was down to the absolute wire. So now for my last con, which was the fact that the party was constantly repeating information. Throughout the entire campaign, they would be told something, and then for the next 2 or 3 episodes, they would have to be repeating it constantly so they could remember it. Now, I do think there is a reason for this, and I think it was the way they were shooting episodes, right? They didn't have a set schedule. It was sort of and we learned this during the sick day stream that they did, that they basically shoot whenever they can, if that makes sense. So they would be maybe they would shoot on the Thursday, maybe they would shoot on the Monday, maybe they'd shoot on the Wednesday. And they would do that throughout the entire month until they got to the last week where they just didn't film at all. Or the middle week where they didn't film at all, and then there would be a time of space where they just didn't record anything, which could be as little as a week or as little as 2 weeks, depending on when they last, made the video. Because this is the nature of pre-recording things, so they forgot a lot of stuff. And I get that to an extent, but it also got mildly annoying with how often Matt would have to correct them about information that they were receiving, that they received maybe even earlier in that same episode. And the constant repeating, to me, got a little old. Eventually this stopped. Luckily, I don't know what changed, but eventually this stopped. And then the whole constantly repeating information stopped around episode 90-ish. Which basically the reason it stopped is because it was in the end game of the whole situation. We were towards the end of what was happening, so we got to move forward now. So maybe that was it. Who knows? But that was basically my last con. Those are the only 3 cons. They are big issues, but I don't think they're this is the worst campaign sort of big issues, right? I didn't think that way once. For me, this isn't the worst campaign. I don't think there is a worst campaign. They're all fun. They're all enjoyable. So for me, this is a nice way to end this trilogy of campaigns. I very much enjoyed everything that happened with this campaign. I loved how it wrapped up every single campaign. And hopefully that means going into the future, we're going to have stories that don't need to rely on other things. I guess that is another con for this campaign, is that it heavily relies on stuff that came before. Even one of the player characters has a backstory that relies on something that came before. The Delilah storyline and Laudna storyline wouldn't make too much sense without, campaign 1. And then as far as Ludinus' whole intimidation factor came from the fact that we had seen him in campaign 2, and that he was the leader of the Cerberus Assembly, a group of characters that we learned about in campaign 2. So there's a bunch of stuff that does happen throughout this campaign that sort of means that you have to watch campaign 1, campaign 2 to understand it, which is I guess a con for it. But if you're a big fan of Critical Role, you've watched those already, or you're eventually going to watch those, so eventually it'll make sense. So realistically, I don't think that's that big of an issue that it doesn't stand on its own 2 feet entirely. There are lots of it, like the whole Ruidus born thing and the whole Ruidus storyline does stand on its own. It's just like the main villain of it, and then one character background needs other characters. So to an extent, I would say like it's an eight, or not an eight. It's a table, right? It's got 4 legs. 2 of the legs require campaign 1 and campaign 2, and the other 2 require just campaign 3. So if that makes any sense, hopefully that analogy made sense. But overall, I don't think that's a big issue. I actually very much enjoyed that fact because as a fan who have seen it all, I enjoyed it. I'm sure that some people who haven't seen it all, maybe not so much of a fan of the idea that they have to watch X amount more hours. I couldn't do the math right on the top of my head of how long it is, but I get the feeling that not everyone's going to be on the same board or on the same page that I'm on, if that makes sense. So, who knows? But overall, I fucking loved this. I loved every second of making recaps, making videos, watching it, theorizing about this campaign, because I feel like this campaign gave me more like theory fodder than anything else that's happened in campaigns before, right? I feel like this campaign gave us the most theory-centric stuff because of the nature of this being a one long story thing that was constantly unraveling. And I loved how EXU sort of interchanged between or interconnected between everything as well, and how the EXU trilogy with Brennan Lee Mulligan, which is going to seemingly end with Divergence, is going to continue that thread. So I'm very excited for that. Looking forward to that in a big way. So yeah, I don't think I have much else to say outside of thank you for watching. Everything. Literally, thank you for watching 121 recaps, like 200 other videos on top of that. Like, it's been a crazy ride, and this video is technically where everything started. Like, I made a video years ago after the end of campaign 2 where I had to get my feelings out about it and how much I loved it and how much it like affected me as a person and like changed my life. It literally saved my life in certain such scenarios. So this being like full circle to that is kind of funny that now we're talking about the end of campaign 3, and that means soon I'm going to have to make a predictions video for the next group of characters for campaign 4, and I'm waiting for information on if it's going to be Daggerheart or if it's going to be D&D, because that will determine what I try to guess as. I mean, I'll have way less to go off of if it's Daggerheart, but we'll see. Anyway, with that all being said, thank you all for watching, and I will see you on Friday for the recap of EXU Divergence, episode 1. It's Divergence, right? I'm not just saying a random word. I'm pretty sure it's Divergence. Anyway, I'll see you guys then. Peace.